Anyone who believes in indefinite growth on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist.
We don't want to focus politics on a notion that involves the rejection of principles around which a large majority of our fellow citizens organize their lives.
We are not as endlessly manipulable and as predictable as you would think.
Tonight, though, I suppose we're focusing more on design within the context of education. And there I have to confess that my own knowledge is very much based on my experiences as a parent. I started reflecting on the parents' evenings that I'd been to. And I recalled that in that ghastly scramble for 3 minutes with the English teacher and 3 minutes with the maths teacher and the jockeying for position with the other parents, rather, that I don't think I'd ever gone off to talk to the design and technology teacher, and that is an embarrassing confession to make. But I suspect for me it seemed as though it was a subject that was both compulsory and yet somehow not crucial to my two growing sons' education. And there is something odd in that, it seems to me, that we might be exploring tonight.
It's never an easy question to answer when people say, what do you do for a living? I am a designer, a programmer, and an artist. A programmer is what I do. That's my technical skill, if you like. And I actually do that in the service of design and art. My mother is actually a maths lecturer and a pianist, and my father was a computer programmer and a painter. So you can imagine that all of my life, science, mathematics, and arts have been a big part of my life. I'll go on to show you a frame of one of my animations. This was actually created for the Victorian Albert Museum. You're probably quite interested within the context of education to know what I studied at A level. Okay, I studied mathematics, I studied S-level mathematics, I studied economics, I studied S-level economics, and I studied physics. So you must be thinking, how on earth did somebody with that sort of education end up being an artist? Truth was, as a child, art was the thing that showed through. I happily defaced all of my parents' walls with paint and was always getting dirty. In my teens, maths kind of came out. And I'm pretty sure that's actually just because my mum was a GCSE and A-level maths lecturer, so there's a lot of help in that. I was fortunate enough to go to grammar school in Liverpool, and they very much pushed me and wanted me to kind of go the major academic route and become an accountant. In the 1990s, which is when I was finishing up high school, the digital media industry came along, and here was an industry that perfectly combined a creative skill, a design skill, and also a technical skill, because back then you couldn't make websites and interactive projects without programming. Ironically, a lot of the early work I did in the context here was actually based on medical visualization and educational projects, kind of helping people understand anatomy and things like that. In the 2000s, the ubiquity of powerful computers in the home and in our lives led to what's called generative art and design, which is what I'm going to talk to you about today. This is the Sunderland Aquatic Centre, which is a large Olympic-sized swimming pool. And on the side here is a big projection screen. And they came to me and said they wanted a large piece of public art for that screen, and that basically they wanted something that hinted at this kind of wonderful aquatic area inside. It's lovely and relaxing and lots of fun and therapeutic. And basically what we decided on doing was to do a piece that was based around coral and that wonderful, kind of a nature documentary, when you see underwater scenes of corals kind of gently flowing and wonderful, vibrant colors. And what's worth pointing out about this is that this is not an animation in the sense of a DVD. This is not something that you put in a DVD player and watch, and every time you watch it, it's exactly the same. What's actually going on here is that it's actually a computer program that's running, and that I have basically mathematically model the way that things like coral grow and the sorts of colors that come out of these underwater organisms. And so with these rules that I've programmed the computer with, it then decides kind of what to grow where and what color to choose. So quite literally, every time I run this program, you would never see the same pattern twice. Okay, rational, mathematical, scientific approach to art and design. I got to stress firstly, it's actually nothing new. Since the dawn of ages, humankind has been using mathematics in its culture in order to show off its intellectual prowess. The pyramids being a great example. Not only is there the famous question of how on earth did they build them, but if you actually look at the internal dimensions of the pyramids, you'll see that there's numbers and mathematical patterns in there that actually, even today, people would struggle to be able to make those sorts of calculations in their head, and it's exactly the kind of thing that we use computers for. But in a more modern time, the reality is that very little design is handmade. If you go into a design studio now, you will not see drawing boards. They're just not there anymore. And I myself, I can't draw, I can't even hold a pen, I don't paint, I don't sketch. My work is made purely in mathematics and computer code. Now, mathematic tools can be used in lots of areas of design, sort of color use, typography, geometry, layout, and increasingly design is being approached as a kind of almost a science with formal testing and user behaviors and things like that in order to try and make design more usable or more effective or more appealing. Everyone probably knows the term the golden ratio, which is a mathematical relationship, geometric relationship that can be created and gives rise to a set of ratios which you find within nature occur a lot, and also even within painters who famous paintings who nobody knew that they had access to this sort of mathematics. These paintings, you find these numbers. There is something innate in the fact that they give rise to well-composed paintings. A more basic example is what's called a packing algorithm, which you can imagine if you're filling up a lorry and you've got lots of boxes. The ideal way to fill up spaces can be solved by algorithm. And you can imagine this is incredibly useful for things like newspapers, where you have a number of pages and a number of articles, and you want to minimize your paper use. Okay, second thing I want to talk about very briefly is new forms of design facilitated by technology. The computer has really shifted from being this grey box tool that, Dad has in the study to being this kind of consumer item that people actually consume media on. The best example, obviously, being the iPad and things like that. And this has given birth to interactive media, such as YouTube, things that we all use on our computers. This work was called Naomi, and it was produced for Show Studio. They put on a show called Fashion Revolution, produced by Nick Knight, the photographer. It's an idea that me and him had been throwing about for a few years. And he said, let's stick it in a room with absolutely no lights in it and no windows. And then let's point a projector at it and let's allow people who go to the Show Studio website anywhere in the world to be able to paint on a screen and whatever they paint appear on the statue. And so this statue became a way for people to participate all around the world, even if they couldn't see this show in the physical space at Somerset House. So people could converse by writing, messages on it. Where this sits or would sit within the design realm is quite ambiguous, because I think looking at that, nobody would deny that that's art and or design. You could probably argue between you whether it's art and design, but in order to make this, that was pure science and technology. All that we did is this process of 3D scanning, 3D printing, and computer programming. There was never an artist who sat there drawing sketches and things like that. This was purely a case where science and technology meets art and design representation. And then moving on to the last section, scientific modeling and simulation as art and design. And that can apply to many different things, but it can be modelling of matter and material. It can also be behavioural modelling of living organisms. And a best example of this is you see it every day in special effects on films now. Lord of the Rings, where you see those fight scenes where there's literally 20,000 orcs. People did not choreograph 20,000 people. It's not possible. What they did is they built computer animation of orcs and then built behavioural modelling behaviours, so you could literally say, tell 10,000 orc-like things to do orc-like behaviours, and that's how it came about. Believe you me, nobody sat there and individually choreographed 20,000. It would be impossible. But also, it's led to this kind of medium of generative art and design.
I want to start really by talking about a timetable. The timetable for your school life. If you think back to your school, to your life in school and the timetable that you had for your lessons, which is a series of little boxes, in each one a subject. And that's kind of how we experience school life. And talking about this, I'm picking up really on some things that Daniel said in his presentation. He was talking about picking different subjects and having picked those subjects being funneled into what teachers perceived was the path of his life, or what the path of his life should be. In school, we experience our lives through these little boxes. We go to rooms and we do a different thing in each room, and then we go to another room, we do something else, and at the end of the day, we go home. When we leave school and when we do a job, our experience isn't like that at all. If I think about my role in school, my role is predominantly to do with art and design. That's what my title is. But my role in school involves all kinds of other things that would fall into, naturally, other categories, other subject areas. So a lot of what I do is to do with communication. So you might say that that's English. A lot of what I do is also to do with ICT. I spend a lot of time recording data, assessing my students' work. I also have to use other skills which might not fall into any school category, school subject at all. Things like leadership, things like working with others. When I perform these functions in my role, I don't go to a different room to do each one. I don't put on a different set of clothes to do each one. So I experience those things holistically. They are natural facets of the thing that I do, which is peculiar because when we go through school and when we're trained and educated to go out into the world, everything seems to be very much about separating things, about categorizing things, about disconnecting different areas from each other. Another disconnect that I think exists between the real world as we experience it in our lives now and the world that we experienced in school is to do with what actually happens in the classroom. And in my subject, talking about my subject in a rather stereotypical way, I think it's encapsulated in this question. Why should I draw this shoe when I want to be an investment banker? Why should students do the things that we sometimes ask them to do in an art and design classroom when perhaps they don't want to do anything to do with art and design later on in their life? Now that's a question that's really about challenging students perhaps who don't want to go on and study art and design later, but an equally challenging question for an art and design teacher, a contemporary art and design teacher, might be this. Why should I draw this shoe when I want to be a conceptual video installation artist? And what we need to think about, perhaps, art teachers and DT teachers together, is the relevance of what goes on in our classroom to what goes on in the world outside, and particularly the relevance of the kind of art or the kind of DT that goes on in our classrooms as compared to the art and DT that goes on in the world at large. Another disconnect between the real world and the school world is, I think, in the way subjects relate to each other and what I could describe as the missed opportunities and connections between subjects. When I teach my Year 7 students about colour theory, how often in teaching that do I go and collaborate with the science department and talk to the students not only about how colour works in art and design, but how colour works generally, how light works, about optics, about how the human eye works, about pigments and how they are made and where they come from. And the answer, sadly, is not often enough, if ever. So there's a potential there for collaboration between subjects and drawing natural connections which exist between subjects, which is often missed. one of the problems that I feel about schools at the moment is that the conditions and the environment under which students learn, under which we ask students to learn, are often really very different to the conditions in which we expect their learning to be employed. Basically, what happens in school is not what happens at work and not what happens when you go out in the world. And we experience things in school in a very different way. And I think that's a problem, because when that's the case, why should we be surprised when students fail to see the relevance of what we're doing in schools? Our school leadership's brave enough to risk this kind of change to the curriculum, particularly if, and I think this is particularly important in the current climate, if the status quo is getting us good grades and good Ofsted reports, because we know how important those things are to schools. But in my mind, as a teacher, exam results are not necessarily the be-all and end-all in students being ready for the world outside the school.
Just some observations, really. I think that, no, Daniel didn't talk all that much about his educational, the educational basis in his work. He gave us example. He talked about his parents and the richness of the background there, math, science, music, and art, which I thought was interesting. He talked about the good fortune, in inverted commas, of graduating into the sort of new media age, which was ready for somebody with his particular mix of skills. Also, you were encouraged, Daniel, to go into accountancy and the A-levels that you taught. I guess I was thinking that it's probably quite an advantage to leave school being told you're good at something, rather than leaving school under the impression that you're not really much good at anything. And maybe because you were clearly numerate and you had a confidence in mathematics, that made mathematics a sort of tool of choice when you sort of developed creatively later on. Conversely, for me, craft design and technology, because I'm 42, so I'm pre the compulsory DT generation. Craft design and technology, as I experienced, was a salvation. I mean, I hated the rest of school pretty much, and was one of those people who needed to be using their hands, needed to be doing practical things. But clearly there was a debate going on at the time in the late 80s about design technology. The national curriculum discussions were starting to happen, and there was a sense that this was a subject which had some sort of status, some sort of beginnings of a parity of esteem, and I think that really helped me in doing my practical kind of making stuff and putting that into a context of design, of technology, of problem solving, research, analysis, etc., which frankly I wouldn't have got to through the other subject routes. And I've always felt through my career in HE, teaching design at university level, that through all the debates that we've been through about why we're training so many designers, the design industry doesn't need these many designers. And no, actually design is a fantastic route for practical people who are much more motivated perhaps by application, by the questions that few people have raised. You know, why am I drawing this shoe? Why are we learning this in maths? You know, to me, and interestingly to my children who are at secondary school now, that is absolutely compelling. You know, why are we doing these things? And design, you know, is just a fantastic vehicle for providing the answer to that why, you know, if properly used.
Daniel's work is deeply rooted in mathematics and science, and of course engineering is as well. But of course engineering must have art and creativity in there for all the wonderful products and innovations that we come up with. And design and technology also is so important for us, because it's the only experience of practical learning that young people have in school, in the formal learning environment. And if young people don't have this practical identity, then they can't conceive of themselves as being practical, and therefore they're unlikely to go on to careers in engineering or in creative industries. And indeed, this is a struggle at the moment when we do have D&T. So if in the curriculum review we lose statutory right for D&T, that would be even worse, particularly given the strong cultural countercurrents in this kind of era of cult of celebrity, where engineering is seen as dirty and oily and these perceptions. But I don't want to talk about just the economic imperative of D&T and be the kind of instrumentalist, the poster boy for instrumentalist education pandering to the CBI and industry, because I think actually it's really important that all young people have a general education with practical education as part of that, and they experience the widest range and opportunities in the school. And as John mentioned, D&T is a mechanism for other learning of other academic subjects, be it English, be it mathematics and so on. But we have got a challenge, and I think we need to be pragmatic at this point, and we need to secure a place for D&T in the national curriculum. I think one of the problems we have is spelling out why young people should have a statutory right to a design and technology education. And you know, as I walk through Walthamstow Market every morning on my way to work, I look at all the people setting up their stalls, and I think, why does the design process, why is it important that they should be taught it, or their children should be taught it in school? You know, how does that make them better citizens? You know, you can make that argument for science, for mathematics, for English, for history, but I don't think we've yet got a compelling argument for design and technology. So we're in this middle of this national curriculum review. I think we have to take a really long, hard look and be frank amongst us in the community about what we can and can't keep in D&T. I don't think we can maintain the status quo. We can't just rebadge or reformat what we've got. We need to really ask some questions. And I'm going to be quite provocative here and maybe get thrown out. But here's some points. Design currently exists twice in the curriculum, in art and design and technology. Is that too much? Should we be saying, let's have it in art only, and we should have engineering and technology? Secondly, the breadth of D&T is vast. We've got resistant materials, systems and control, electronics, product design, graphic design, food technology, textiles. You know, should we be having all of these different things? You know, I've often said, and just to be provocative, we should get rid of textiles. And the textiles people say, no, it's outrageous. Because the textiles industry is really huge in this country. And so is food manufacturing, one of the biggest manufacturing in the country. Maybe we should be saying, well, actually, we don't want to be teaching food manufacturing, but we should go back to cookery or home economics. You know, why not? And you're all thinking, well, of course he's an engineer, he would say that. He's not going to say anything about systems and control. But actually, I do think, you know, should we be throwing children straight into 3D CAD modelling at the age of 12, 13, you know, when they don't know how to do drawing? My third point, and my final point, is that whatever happens, to have any hope of securing D&T in the national curriculum, I think we really need to be framing D&T in the kind of language that the government are talking about, the fundamentals of knowledge, fact, concepts, principles. This is what Tim Oates, the leader of the expert panel who is running the National Curriculum Review, that's how he's couching all the different subjects and the kind of language he's using. So we need to be looking at, the government don't like skills. They want to know knowledge and facts. Mr. Gove and Mr. Gibb are not interested in skills. That was very kind of Labour. This is a very conservative ideology. So we need to frame D&T in that language in order for us to successfully have it in the curriculum.